Hello and welcome to another half pint session. Normally I'm drinking a half pint of beer, but it was a very early morning, so this is the remains of a pint of coffee, but I think that's about a little less than half pint. Today I am joined by not one, but two people. One is a returning guest, Mr. Justin Wiggins, and another is someone that I followed for a long time, a while ago, and it's wonderful he's now popped back up on my radar, Matthew Huff. Gentlemen, welcome to Pints with Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be back.
So, Justin, let's start with you as you are the returning all-star. For people who haven't listened to any of your episodes before, would you mind just introducing yourself?
Yes, well, first I would say I'm not an all-star, but a peasant bard, so there we are. So my name is Justin Wiggins. I'm author of Surprised by Agape and other books. I am a convert from agnosticism to Christianity through the influence of John Foreman of Switchfoot and the writings of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, George MacDonald. Have a great zest for life, work, community, good beer, coffee, travel when I can afford to travel. And I have a great passion for myth, and I strive in my life to live out my faith by grace and love people of all worldviews and of all places that I've ever been to. Ireland is my favorite. And as we all know, Lewis was a Belfast Ulster man, so there we are.
Mm-hmm. And you've written several books. Would you mind just mentioning which ones those are?
Yes, so there was Surprised by Agape, published in 2018 by Mr. Grant Hudson of Clarendon House. He changed my life. My first podcast interview was actually with yourself, and I was quite terrified, but it turned out very, very well. And
Me too.
And then the next book was Surprised by Myth that I co-wrote with Grant. And the next few books that were published was through Steve Called of Inspired. There's Marty and Irene. It was an epistolary novella. Tirnanog, it was inspired by the ancient Irish myth of Tirnanog and Lewis, and it was a book of stories and poems and essays about writers from Ireland, Scotland, England, and America. Celtic Twilight was a companion to that, inspired by the great Irish poet W.B. Yeats, and then Celtic Song was a book of poems, and then Ragnarok was inspired by Norse mythology, the Vikings TV show, Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, Tolkien's mythology, and the last two recent books were Celtic Donne, which is a Celtic fantasy novella inspired by Celtic mythology, and Sacred Space that I had the honor of co-writing with Mr. Matthew Huff, who is a very gifted poet.
Well, let's turn to you, Matthew. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. It's hard to follow that. Justin's quite an individual. Yeah, my name's Matthew Huff. I teach English literature at a Christian school down near Atlanta, Georgia, in Fairburn, Georgia. I have a wife, Kristen, and I have 4 daughters who I love very much. And like Justin, I love good books. I love to read. I love poetry. We have a shared love of C.S. Lewis, so I think that's part of the draw that connects the three of us here, is that we have a profound influence, or have been profoundly influenced by Lewis. But yeah, I think pursuing Christ, pursuing who he is, and the way in which he has revealed himself to us and given himself over to us through the word and through words, I think is just a powerful, compelling draw for me, that he has blessed us with people, authors and poets and musicians who invite us into these places where we can see him and see his glory through a glass darkly, as Paul says. I think that just fascinates me and fascinates Justin. I think just draws all of us in. And so that's, I think, what led to the book that we decided to co-write together, this idea of sacred space. Like Justin too, I love to write poetry, so I imagine we'll talk about that genre and talk about what draws us to it. But yeah, I'm just grateful to be here and excited for our conversation.
And as you and I were talking before Justin joined, I was explaining that I had followed your podcast on your chapter by chapter through Narnia, particularly with an emphasis on its spiritual meaning. I had followed that for a good while, and I was horrified when I noticed it'd been a while since an episode had appeared, and then I looked online and tried to track you down and saw that you're working on other projects, and I was like, no, I want you to finish this one first. So I just want to reassure the viewers that you have been publicly rebuked by me.
Ah, thanks.
No.
Well, this winter might not last forever. You never know. There might be a spring coming for that podcast.
That
as with anything else, those things sometimes take time, and you have to find time to do that.
Yes, and particularly if you've got 4 girls, that's very time consuming, and not to mention the fact that you probably never get access to the bathroom ever. Actually, Matthew, let's stay with you. Would you mind just telling us how you and Justin first met?
Oh, yeah. So in 2022, summer of 22, I had just the beautiful privilege to get to go to Oxford. There is a C.S. Lewis conference that was there. And so it was about 8 days, maybe, Justin, 8 or 9 days that the conference lasted. And so while we were there, we were meeting other people who are Lewis enthusiasts or just people who are interested in him for a variety of reasons. And somewhere along the way, that conference in the evenings had open mic night style time for the conference attendees to gather late at night and share poems and so on. And I think it was the first night there, Justin was sitting with some people. I came over there, or he invited me to sit with him. I forget how it happened, but we just started talking with each other, and almost every single sentence was a "Oh, really? You too?"
I thought I was the only one.
Realization. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and so we found out we both really loved the poetry of Malcolm Guite, who was there, and so that was a big connecting point for us. We were talking, of course, about Lewis, and then Tolkien, and then just all sorts of things. So as the conference unfolded, I think he and we went out to dinner a lot and just fell into this really great friendship.
Well, Justin, can you pick up the story? How did it go from that friendship to your latest project?
Yeah, so as Matt was saying, we met the first night of the Bag Inn Cafe, and I was so excited to hear from all the different artists sharing their art, and struck up a conversation with Matt, and he instantly became as John O'Donohue put it, an Anam Cara, Irish Gaelic for soul friend, those people that you meet who speak your truth. And we were, the more we got to know each other, the more we found out we liked the similar writers such as Flannery O'Connor, T.S. Eliot, Malcolm Guite, of course, Lewis Tolkien, Dorothy Sayers, Charles Dickens, George MacDonald, and we both started to discuss a possible idea of collaborating on a project. As you know, one of the most encouraging things about the friendship between Tolkien and Lewis, as well as the other Inklings of Winbar, Phil Charles Williams, Warnie Lewis, is that they all collaborated. And they also, of course, offered constructive criticism and could be quite honest and brutal. Especially with Hugo Dyson's comments about Tolkien's mythology. Oh my! I'll have to send you the quote, Matt. Yeah.
Yes. This is a family show. We're not gonna say what he said.
But Matt and I discussed the book idea, and it was great to get to know him. And we kept in contact after the Oxbridge event, and he came up with a title, Sacred Space, and he conveyed his passion for wanting to continue to collaborate on this book. And I told him about Steve Caught of Inspired, and he's a great guy. He's an Englishman, lives in Lincoln, England. And Matt had told me about his previous books that he's read, which I have yet to read, and I will get to that at some point soon. And so, and he started sending me poems, and I sent him. And so throughout, oh goodness, the conference ended in August of 2022. Yeah. And throughout a period of a year, we talked about the collaboration. we would send each other poems. I reached out to Steve Called of Inspire and I said, hey, I have an idea to collaborate with a friend on this book, and he has the title. He was inspired by all these incredible writers, and the title Sacred Space came to him. And the context for that, it means finding shalom in the chaos of life. And, those experiences of beauty and joy that we all have that remind us that we are the beloved of Christ, and that brings us healing and renewal, and that's rejuvenating. That correlates to Lewis's definition of joy, going back to the German, the Sehnsucht, the numinous, the transcendent. And it came together very well. And I'm so thankful that Matt and I stayed dedicated to it, because, sometimes friends talk about collaborating on a project and it might not come to fruition, and that's okay. We all have busy lives and things going on, but he stayed very dedicated to it. And I will say he's a better poet than myself. He's a very gifted, very, very gifted poet. Not that it's a competition. I think my real strength lies in nonfiction and fiction. I think my poetry is decent. It's why I'm a peasant bard, But yeah, the book came together very well. And we went through the last edits, and we had a couple of different ideas for the cover. And Matt found this wonderful cover by an Italian visual artist of Moses and the burning bush, conveying that theophany that he had. And Dr. Donne King, C.S. Lewis scholar and professor at Montreat College, was kind enough to endorse our book. And it was published as of January the 5th. And we have had some incredibly moving reviews from people on Amazon and Goodreads, and it has meant a lot to me. It's brought me a great deal of joy, and we are in the process of planning a book signing in Asheville in the next few weeks.
Lovely. Well, Matthew, can you just talk us through the book itself? How were you structuring it? Are there the themes that move through, or a progression?
Yeah. So the title, I think we were both, when it was offered, I think it was just an aha moment for both of us.
Peace in chaos.
So
that's a man who's got 4 children.
Well, right. And the need for sacred space,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that would be a thread that Justin and I aimed our poetry at for this project, is just this notion that Abraham Kuyper has this great quote where he says, there's not one square inch in the entire cosmos over which Christ doesn't say mine. So sacred space is not just a national park or some sort of gorgeous sunset or something like that. These more obvious places, they exist in the seemingly mundane and the seemingly ordinary. So there are some of our poems where we are reveling in these overwhelming, gorgeous bursts of God's glory. But then there are also some of them that pick up seemingly trivial or seemingly ordinary things and try to hold them up a little bit differently to see how God's glory and God's holiness is there. So the title, I think, is our first invitation to a reader, is to say that these poems seem small, they're short, they're little bite, they fit on a single page, and yet because of the God that we serve, every single one of those is an invitation into holy ground. We decided on 60 poems total, 30 from Justin and 30 from me. There was something lovely about each of our poems. If you read it at a slow pace, would probably take a minute, and so that would be 1 hour of time reading through 60 poems. And I love, too, if you open up the book, the first 30 of them are Justin's, and then the last 30 are mine. And Justin's style, I think, is very conversational, very, very direct, very, he uses a lot of exclamation points, and just very conversational. Justin's got that great mountain voice, too. So his poetry sounds like you're sitting next to somebody chatting about the things that you love. Whereas Malcolm Guite, for me, is a great model of how to try to resurrect or recover the sonnet form. So what I was trying to do was something a little bit more formal with sonnets. So I think you have a great symmetry there, where you have a balance between sort of formality and structure and those sorts of aspects of our lives, with also the much more accessible day in day out sorts of experiences. So I think that balance between us is something that we would want a reader to notice or to maybe be aware of before reading through it. But the shared love, I think Justin talks about thin places in one of his poems. And I think that's one of the things that grips us, is that God gives us these moments in our lives where the boundary line between the real world, quote unquote, and the heavens or the eternal, those places are thinner, that somehow you get glimpses through them. I think we are just so enthralled by that gift that that's what unites our different poetic voices and our different efforts in this collection.
I've been racking my brains to try and remember who said it, but I remember one author saying something to the effect about the world being charged with the grandeur of God,
Gerald
but only those who see it take off their shoes. And
Yes.
and those
Hopkins.
those thin places are not seen by everyone. And I remember in the walking holidays, or when they would just go out in general, Lewis and his friends, they would talk about soaking machines, those places where you go and you just stand or sit and just soak it all in. It's like a recharge station.
Amen.
Justin, have you got a poem or two you might like to share with us?
Sure, I would love to share Ode to John Donne and Tirnanog. So let's see here. All right, Ode to John Donne. You survived.
And just before we start that, for the people that don't know who John Donne is, who is he?
He was an incredible 17th century metaphysical poet that Lewis was very fond of. He also inspired William Wordsworth and John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Lord Byron, Christina Rossetti, and many other writers, and was the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the fact that he was British was the key thing that I was going for. But okay, we got there eventually.
Indeed. Amazing. Oh, Ode to John Donne. You survived a terrible plague. You were imprisoned for love. You suffered grievous pains. You found it sometimes hard to trust in the goodness and love of God. You knew the intense tension between lust and love. Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, priest, lover, and human, filled with contradictions and paradoxes. Great metaphysical poet that wrote beyond the cerebral, a wild, untamable joy filled your being, sustaining you through all your terrible losses. Inspiring many poets, musicians, and writers hundreds of years after your death. Oh, 17th century poet who made this bleak world seem brighter. Your literary legacy has given me a greater passion for each breath.
Lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. And the last particular one I will share is Tirnanog. It is my favorite Irish myth. And in the myth, it is where the Fae live, the Tuatha De Nu from Celtic mythology, or the Isle of the Blessed. And when I first discovered it, it roused that Zinzuk joy. And what fascinated me about it was I eventually found out that Lewis heard about this myth as a young lad growing up in County Down, Northern Ireland, and also in a letter, I can't remember who it was to, but he blatantly said that the Irish myth of Tirnanog influenced aspects of the magician's nephew. So I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So Tirnanog, the transcendent desire was there before I ever experienced it in time and space. My father's treachery only intensified it, and though numerous times I was close to death, I was spared and had a potent glimpse of the eternal ethereal place. All the books, songs, films, and rich, life-changing experiences evoke the Zinzuk joys C.S. Lewis and Seamus Heaney wrote so poignantly about. The two Irish writers became kindred spirits and helped me figure out that the desire for the mystical Isle of Tirnanog, where the Fae live upon, was no delusion but an objective desire to know my Creator outside of myself. My reason, imagination, faith, and desire came together under the spell of the deep magic before the dawn of time. The song of healing sung by the great bard restored my broken heart and mind in Tirnanog with the Celtic song of faith, hope, love, and sacramental bread and wine. And that was, of course, inspired by Lewis, my favorite writer. Seamus Heaney, who Matt also appreciates, great Irish writer. He's my favorite poet. And for me, that poem captures the pain and the suffering and the struggle that I experienced before my conversion from agnosticism to Christianity. So it's deeply personal, and I brought in some elements from Celtic mythology in it. And of course, after conversion, I went through a dark night of the soul. But out of that suffering came healing and hope. And as we all three know, by his wounds we are healed. So I had a lot of fun with, even though it's very serious and very personal poem. I had a lot of fun with it because I was able to bring in elements from Celtic mythology and love for Haney and Lewis, and to try and convey the joy that we all experience on the journey of faith because of the agape love of the great bard Christ.
How about you, Matt? Do you have one or two that you'd like to share?
Sure. Since this is a shared platform for all things Lewis, there's this place near Magdalen College that's called Addison's Walk that I'm sure everybody's heard the stories about with Lewis and Tolkien and everything. So getting to go to Oxford and see Magdalen College itself and to see Addison's Walk, to actually be able to be face to face with these places that you'd sort of mythologized in your mind was just one of those moments where you're prepared for these stabs of joy. You're prepared for it, especially since Justin and I are Americans. Just being across the Atlantic is itself that sort of unreal sort of encounter with something that you'd only ever read about. So while I was there, I decided with some of the free time to go see Magdalen, see Addison's Walk, and I'm a runner. I like to run, so I thought this will be great. I'll go to Addison's Walk because it's just a loop, and I'll run it, and so that way I'll get my run in for the day at this very place where Lewis used to amble. And so I was just all super excited about all these interests of mine converging. And there was a moment there where I was just trying to take it all in and just see what Lewis would have seen or whatever. That I realized that walking in the footsteps of your heroes is one of those innate human impulses. We love our heroes and we love to aspire to great people who went before us. But then there was also this recollection that I'm running this path. So if they were actually here with me, I would have gone ahead, right? And so there's this like, what am I doing? So I think in that moment I thought there's a great impulse we have to admire Lewis and admire Tolkien and admire these men, but also Justin and you, David, and I, we've all been given this path and this road that we have to walk, and we can't just live in the shadows of others. So there's a poem I wrote that's called Addison's Walk that's about that tension. I'd planned to walk this sacred road alone, yet not alone, but met at every bend by Lewis and by Tolkien as they roam with me this path that they had trod as friends. We'd amble by the autumn leaves that fall and form the mold for stories still to tell. We'd wander till we heard the distant call of northern wonder rung from Magdalen's bell. But I had laced my running shoes instead and took a couple laps around the track. A choice to leave those shades and charge ahead beyond a life of only looking back. And though those men did lead me to this road, my own adventure calls, and I must go.
Very good.
I love it.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, I think I can say with a good deal of scholarly certainty, Lewis never ran Addison's Walk. Don't think so.
No, I can imagine. A nice leisurely
with the
stroll. Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Where can people go to pick up a copy of your book?
They can find Sacred Space on the Imp-Spired website as well as Amazon.com. And again, Matt and I have been very encouraged and thankful for all the positive response from readers. It's been out for a bit over a month, and having these reviews on Amazon and Goodreads is great. And the fact that people have taken their time to read this honest and hopeful work of art that we had the idea for, and it came to fruition, and we sought to be honest about our journeys of faith while glorifying Christ and acknowledging him, as Matt said, as the source of all goodness and beauty and truth. And we're incredibly thankful.
Wonderful.
Amen.
Anything else you want to say about how people can get contact? Try that again. Is there anything else you'd like to say about how people can get in contact with you, or anything else you'd like to advertise before we wrap up?
I would agree with Justin that that's where you can find this collection. But I would also just recommend people to sometimes poetry can be one of those things that has a sort of daunting, kind of rarefied air about it that can either be terrifying. I'm no poet. I'm not creative. I'm not imaginative. Or it can have this unfortunate air of pretension around it. So I would just hope that people, if they picked up Sacred Space and read it, would be encouraged, warmed, cheered to know that there might be other people who feel the same things or have the same desires and concerns. But I would also recommend just take up a pen and write. That the poetic effort, I think, is a beautifully human thing, and it does not have to be a sonnet or a ballad or anything. I think just as every square inch is a sacred space, I think every human being has this sacred impulse that Lewis recognized. We all have this desire within us that nothing in the world can satisfy, and I think poetry has that distinct capacity. It says something that can't be said any other way. And I think allowing yourself to try to put an imaginative phrase or to put a poetic turn to something that you've encountered or experienced, or just to begin writing anything at all, I think you'd be surprised at how beautiful of an experience that is for your soul. Whether or not you think it's good, that's almost irrelevant. It's your offering that you're putting forward from your heart. And I think in that way, poetry is for everybody. And so I would leave with that recommendation that somebody, upon closing this episode, go out and get a 97-cent pen and get to work.
I'm sure the Inklings would approve.
Yeah.
From that conversation between Tolkien and Lewis on Addison's Walk, he wrote Mythopoeia. And there's a line in there that says, "We make by the law in which we're made," that we are made by a creator, and it's therefore the most natural thing in the world for us to subcreate within his creation.
Yes.
So on that note, thank you guys for coming. And viewers, please join us again next time when we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.